do that, and we'll figure it out.
Okay, I think we might be live. I don't know how long it takes to actually go live, but I'm going to assume we're live. So I'm Jeff Saderpunk, and this is Nemo, and this is another episode of New World Chaos.
That's right. We got the novelty, we've got the whole Earth, and we've got plenty of crazy things happening. New World Chaos. Yeah.
Yes, like we have no guest today. That's one of them.
Yeah, we were
So
supposed
we
to have a
have
guest.
a spot for a guest or two. If anybody out there listening would like to come on the show and talk with us and be part of the
That's right.
conversation, just let us know in the comments. Our email, jeffandnemo@gmail.com, and we can send you a link. Let's see.
That's right.
Or
Yeah,
actually, this
it's
is a temporary room. I could just put the link in the comments.
really.
Yeah, I'm going to do
Oh, I
that.
see what
I'm
you mean.
going
Yeah,
to.
you're the Zoom master. Yeah, it's today feels particularly spontaneous, flying by the seat of our pants. At least we're wearing pants, as far as the audience knows. Can't really see below the shoulders here. Uh, but I feel like I haven't really talked with you as much recently, Jeff, and now we don't have our guest, and we were catching up, and it seems like a lot of what's really present right now has to do with relationships and social factors. And even though we're kind of an unknown podcast by pretty much every standard, there's already some turmoil happening. People reacting to the podcast, at least in our personal lives, and it's the good, the bad, the ugly. I don't know. I think it's a vulnerable thing. I think the way we're doing this podcast so far is more vulnerable, and I see that as a good thing so far because in recent years I've been frustrated with what I would loosely call the counter movement to social justice, and just thinking a lot of it is what comedy on the internet, just making fun of it and not really taking it very seriously. And I think there's a lack of real connection, a lack of vulnerability. So it's one of the themes that I'm inspired by today. I know you're sending out some links and all that right now.
Yeah, I put the email, I put the Zoom link in the comments. So if you want to hop on the Zoom and be a guest or chat with us today, come on.
That's right. Yep, I shared it a couple of places. Um, Jeff, you got your coffee, I see.
Have my coffee,
Yeah,
water. I'm ready to
I like
go.
to drink tea. I mean, coffee, I like the flavor of coffee with like a little bit of creamer, but I don't need the caffeine. Most substances have a very strong effect on me, and I just need to stay chilled out. I can go past cloud nine on my own without any assistance.
All right. Oh, caught up. So, in the meantime, what's new in your world?
I've been really burned out, as I told you before we went live. Working this job temporarily, full time, and trying to balance everything else at the same time. And I'm getting kind of frustrated because I want to work on creative projects. And I don't know, things are getting kind of strange in this really mysterious way that if I was more superstitious, I would almost think there's spirits that are pulling strings and we're all puppets or something. Because all of these threads of uh, I don't know, parts of my life that seemed utterly chaotic to have great theme for the podcast that seem to have nothing in common with each other are suddenly coming together in the weirdest, most unexpected ways. Like you and me have been talking about travel, and a lot of people concerned about social justice or that may feel kind of alienated culturally that want to move and leave their area. Maybe there's economic issues, there's upheaval in a lot of major cities. We've been talking about that on Counterweight especially, and a lot of people think that themes of culture and travel are like really important right now. And I'm getting a lot of people really interested in community building, which is like your favorite thing. So that's some of the positive stuff. And I don't know. I mean, we're also there. I think there's still a lot of themes of people losing friendships as they start to speak out, at least in their personal lives. Has come up a lot in Counterweight, actually, even outside of what me and you talked about. Because some people, I think, they're just sharing that they're going crazy. They're getting fed up with being silent and feeling like they're suppressed. And so they say something on a small scale, and then now there's a lot of turmoil with their friendships. It seems like people are starting, like, social justice proponents are, some of them are becoming more aware of the turmoil outside of their bubbles. I don't know, everything's moving at the same time.
Yeah, that's definitely happening with me. And so much of it is happening on social media. It's not any kind of interactions we're having in person or on Zoom. I'm still the same person that they Zoom with. It's they see a meme that I post on social media, or they see an article from Counterweight that I post, or they see a podcast episode that I post, and they have a reaction to that. It's not me as a person, and it's not the person that they know as Jeff. It's social media. It's whatever they're reading into the representation that I'm reflecting as through an article I post or a meme or something like that. And it just seems so everybody knows that social media can be divisive if it's used that way. And I wish if you're going to judge me, I wish you would judge me on me as a person and like the Jeff you know as a person outside of Facebook or social media. But I'm being judged on what I post on social media instead, it feels like. And I don't
Yeah.
know why this is the big taboo, like why social justice is the big taboo. I'm a Satanist,
Mhm.
no problem, no big deal. I have plenty of Christian friends that it's never caused even a ripple of friction. BDSM, we lost one or two people from the back porch that were uncomfortable with being affiliated, but for the most part, very supportive. Not a big deal. I'm gay, not a big deal. Nothing about me that I think would cause problems has seemed to be a problem for people. But this is the taboo. This is the new gay. This is worse than Satanism. This is worse than BDSM. This social. Some people, I don't know. I don't want to go in too much into individual particulars, but I've been told it's making people uncomfortable. I'm not sure exactly how or in what way, and I've been told it's the anti. It's not. It's the fact that I'm so actively against social justice, and it's not that I'm against social justice. I'm not against justice certainly, or racism or that stuff. I'm anti stupidity. I'm anti ideology. I'm anti math is racist, science is racist. That's ridiculous. I don't know how to take a neutral stance on something like that. So if
Yeah.
that's being anti-social justice, then yes, I am against. But mostly for me, it's a reflection of what I'm for, which is autonomy, free speech, individuality, individual free self-expression, self-determination, like we've talked about. So if
Hmm.
that's what I'm being rejected for, or if that's the new taboo is to be pro individual, then I mean, it's no different than all the other stuff I went through growing up, gay, et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. It just hurts that it's coming from people that I have grown really close to. I guess I just
Yeah.
didn't expect it. I knew strangers might be put off by it, or viewers out there in podcast land, but I didn't expect it to come from the same circle that's been supportive of all the other stuff.
Hmm. Yeah. There is a lot of turmoil, and I am almost ironically buffered from it because I've already burned through so many bridges over the years when it doesn't matter what I do. I actually have had plenty of cases where I put in a lot of effort. If I see that it's a person that seems to really accept me and we're actually building a friendship and they just kind of got one foot in social justice, one foot out, then I really do put everything into it that I've got. And uh, inevitably, if they're tethered to social justice in some way, they eventually end the friendship with me. There's only a few cases left where that hasn't happened. And yeah, but I also, some of the comparisons you're making across. say, different traits that have been ostracized or in times past, historically, say, comparing being critical of wokeness or pro autonomy, pro individual, to an older time, recent history, being gay or being a Satanist, I think there's a lot in common with those things, but there's also some differences. And it's weird because, I mean, nobody chooses to be gay, but you can choose to be critical of social justice. If it's belief oriented or it's a role that you choose to play and define in your own terms, then I guess there's a lot more choice there. But with a lot of the core ideology, it has to do with all of these traits people don't choose. And it's not just one, too. It's like a multitude across many different demographic categories that ultimately don't really matter that much in most cases. Maybe in a few select instances it matters, but otherwise it shouldn't matter more than hair color. It's like it's not a big deal. It's not a bad thing. You don't have to hide it. Like we're going to avoid talking about orientation or race or whatever, but I don't see how any of that has to be a problem. But it becomes a problem when an ideology like social justice attacks on those within those categories. They pick people to attack and they pick people to put on pedestals, oppressors and oppressed. And if all of us are divided into oppressors and oppressed, it's really dehumanizing to an extreme. Like, I've never associated the words oppression, oppressed, oppressor with anything that's subtle. It's not a gradient where you can dial it back and just say, we're subtly oppressed. It's a very dramatic kind of language. And if we're all stuck in those dramatic categories, it feels like social justice proponents are trying to relive a kind of epic Greek mythology of good and evil and force that onto this much more complex reality. And so it's like it's inevitable that there's going to be conflict and people will be uncomfortable because they're personalizing it as much as possible in ways where those of us who are hurt by it, we can't just get out of that. It's not like I can stop being a man who's white, who's straight. I can't stop being at the bottom of the caste system. All I could do is pretend to be something a little bit different. Like, I don't know, come out as a woman. And I would never do that. But like, so there's nothing else we can do. So they might see it as we're just disagreeing with their ideology and that's a choice. But it's also that their ideology is actively antagonizing to people like us that over things we don't choose. So what else do they want us to do? I don't want to be at the bottom of a caste system and just grovel for the rest of my life.
I've always been there.
I know people, social justice people that hear me say that stuff are not happy about it. That certainly doesn't market very well to them, but I don't really care about marketing.
Well, one of my big oppositions to it is the cancel culture element to it. And I think there's just something immature and kind of cruel or unkind about canceling people out of the blue. And this just reinforces my opposition to it because I'm being canceled by people. And they're making the point of exactly why I'm opposing this. It's I don't know. They're reinforcing exactly why I'm in opposition to this stuff by enacting this cancel culture toward me as a protest against my being involved in opposing social justice. So it creates a feedback circuit. You also talked about the traveling, and I am very ready to travel. I feel a road trip coming soon. I get my second shot next week, and by May I should be vaccinated fully and cleared to go. So I can see bebopping around the country and exploring maybe where I want to live next, getting to know people along the way in different parts. I have a friend, Bev Reed, that is probably going to be our guest next week. She's very religious. She's Christian, Mormon, and we talked about doing a road trip together and maybe live streaming it or forming a podcast around it, where I'm the Satanist, she's the Christian, and we go explore America together. We're both peers, so we could give peer support along the way for people that would like to talk to peers. And we've discovered that there's more that holds us together than that divides us, that divides us because of our religious beliefs. And so we talked about maybe building that into some kind of road trip slash podcast on the road.
Yeah. Yeah, that when you first told me about that, it sounded awesome. I told some friends about it, and they thought it was the coolest idea, though. Just the fact that here's two people with very different belief systems that often clash with each other very actively, that deliberately want to bond and go travel, and it's just like a personal thing, but it's also adventurous and it's like creative. I just see it as an example of some social phenomenon that I think is really important and is severely lacking these days, and that is this particular aspect of acceptance that people seem to have lost and don't understand. And I don't even know exactly what label to give it. It's like this part of acceptance, it's like a piece that's missing, and it's just like this lacking we have, so that our experience of accepting each other is partial and it's limited or it's fragmented, or I mean, you could say there's less acceptance and there's more intolerance in general if you want to keep it simple, but what I'm referring to is just the understanding of what it's like to not need other people to be the same as you. It's this fundamental acceptance of real basic difference and variety, where like we can connect as human beings and be aware of each other's differences, and that could be something that's totally fine. It can even be something that's a source of creativity and innovation. It's just a I can't even quite articulate the perspective, but I really think it comes down to what happens when you have a stronger internal locus of control and you're developing more of a perspective of individual autonomy, so that you can see what a group is when individuality is not a threat to the group. It's like it's more that we're a collection of marbles that are all different colors rather than like mashed potatoes and we're all just one big blob and we have no individuality. But like it's so much better when you and it's this I think part of what I'm trying to describe that's so hard to put into words is actually the energy that you feel when you're in an agora or like a third space that we've talked about before. And this is what happens with self-determination. If you get the recipe together and you get the people in the same environment, it's like a community space and it's open ended and it's got a strong foundation, then the energy is like this creative excitement and this real joy for each other, as if it's it's like almost like I can imagine being other people. I know that I'm not that person, but I'm excited about what's in their lives as much as my own, even with our differences. I'm not bored and disinterested or bothered by our differences. It's like the whole collection in the mirage or the mural, that's what I meant to say, becomes something beautiful, like a work of art because of the variety in it. Otherwise, it's just a blank canvas and it's just boring. But like, I don't think people know what that experience is like.
Maybe I take it for granted because I've always had that. Like I've never grown up with people that were like me. So I've always been surrounded by diversity or people that were different. And we somehow managed to connect and bond and form relationships anyway. So I've just taken it for granted that the people around me don't all need to think and believe the same way. And oh, hang on. Oh, I'm thinking of all of the people, all of the reasons I would distance myself from somebody or cut off a friendship with them. And it's almost always been in the past because they were becoming very destructive to themselves or potentially to me. Drug abuse, abusive relationships, just people that were kind of going down a dark or destructive road, and I would pull back. And I was always there for them if they came out of it. I didn't just abandon them to it, but I don't want to be taken down with them if that's the direction they're going. But it was never because of what they thought or believed or their aesthetic preferences or a movie they liked or something they might post on social media. Like those I wouldn't even think that those would be reasons for me to cut a person out of my life. And so my criteria for what it takes for me to kind of give up on a person or back away from a friendship is much different than I'm finding out from other people.
Yeah, it's, I don't know, we're in weird times, and
Yes,
I
we
have
are.
to frequently remind myself to like actively practice a certain kind of awareness where I'm noticing other people's experiences and reactions, because I'm sure this is true for me and you more than other people around us. I think a lot of people around us have certain experiences they share, at least to enough overlap that they have defaults and they don't have to constantly be mindful. Whereas it may be useful for me to practice that mindfulness at least a few times a day or whatever, where, like, just as an here's an example out of just a random example, a lot of people I've met experience anxiety enough that they label it and they pay attention to it and they say this is something I deal with in life. And for a lot of those people it's actually a handicap or a detriment, or at least that's how they experience it until they process it therapeutically. But I don't really experience anxiety. In fact, until like maybe 4-ish, 5 years ago, I thought anxiety just meant you were like uncomfortable and restless or something. I don't know. I just thought it was just like vulnerability, like you're just feeling socially vulnerable. I didn't even really think about it. It was not a concept I thought that much about. But if my experience is that different from the average person around me, I also can tell that that's true in other categories. Like when you're talking about social media and the idea of cutting someone off from friendship because of something on social media. I would never think to do that either unless it was something that was particularly extreme. Things that I would say crossed a line if it was on social media, in person, or anywhere, whatever. But that's a really rare thing. Most of the time, honestly, I barely use social media and I'm not even really paying that close attention. And I'm starting to get this weird sense when I practice this mindfulness that I'm actually so far out of the loop with people that are living in like cancel culture and social media world that it's like I'm out of multiple loops that are loops within loops. Like where people, it's like some people will respond to me and we'll get like maybe 5, 6 messages in before I realize that they're actually really antagonized by the conversation and it's a negative thing for them and they're actually trying to lash out at me and I didn't even realize they were trying to be like really criticizing because they were so sarcastic and it's so twisty windy that I had no idea. It's all over text. It's all, you just read it, you don't have body language. Me and you, I'm pretty sure we're just like out of the loop. And the more that there's this ostracizing and segregation and uh, division, the more people are going to be in their own bubbles and be less aware. That's a problem we're dealing with socially.
Yeah, and I don't think that's a good thing. For I mean, we know that there are forces at work that would like to see America pull apart and split apart more than it is and disunify. And so I don't think it's a good thing for people to be splitting up and disconnecting and subdividing like this. I think we're stronger if we come together despite our differences and hang in there and stay connected and stay unified. And I know that social media is one of the things that are being used to try to create division and tear people apart. So I try not to succumb to that, and I think the decision to stay connected despite differences is the probably the right way to go for the future. And so I try to live out that value.
Yeah. Yeah, it's it's really wild to be a person that goes between worlds a lot because now our worlds that we go between are getting further apart.
Yeah.
And I mean, just like with me with the jobs I've had in recent times, they're dramatically different environments. And geographically, the way they're associated is very weird too. Um, like I don't want to be too specific here. Just like generally speaking, I've had jobs that the inside experience is really intensely tied to social justice, and it's a nightmare. It's very cultish. But where it's located geographically has not necessarily any strong association one way or another, other than being in the Twin Cities, which is very social justicey, broadly speaking, very progressive. But then I've also had jobs that are really not very ideological at all and more go with the kind of corporate professional coldness of no personal stuff at work and just kind of do your job, yet geographically are like right next door to a major protest or whatever person was a victim of police brutality in that year or whatever. And then all of a sudden, social justice is like right outside the windows, screaming at the top of its lungs, and all these office people are inside saying, "Oh, I hope I can get through traffic tonight. Looks like there's a protest out there." I'm just like, what is going on here where people are in these totally separate worlds that seem to just desperately want to stay in their bubbles, even though it's nearly impossible to stay in denial? It's like everything's falling apart and people just want to stick their heads in the sands more.
I mean, I guess that's a valid strategy if that's what they want to do. I'm looking at the comment section, and somebody commented the internet has become the new community.
Hmm.
It's not my community. It's not my new community. It's a tool for community building. I've used it that way, but I have a totally different sense of community, and thankfully with Zoom, I've still been able to continue the kind of communities I'm used to. That's one reason that I liked Meetup so much. The website. I was a Meetup organizer for a while because it was people that were using the internet to find each other so that they could meet offline and participate in activities and events. And so I think the internet can be a great tool for forming community and building community, but I don't, it's never been a substitute for community for me. And
Yeah. Honestly, with me, I've had some history with uh, at least internet dependence and maybe addiction, but it really, really strongly depends on what's happening in my real physical world around me. And if I have even a couple of places with a handful of the right people to do some meaningful, productive things, creative, productive, we have a goal in mind, we're an active participants in the situation, then I very much don't use the internet that often. And if I get in a state where I'm suddenly very isolated, more than usual, because things fall apart so often, uh, then it's a bigger struggle. It's like the internet's like a filler. And part of the problem with that is just because I know a lot of people that you could not find the magical recipe to convince them to show up somewhere in person. But they'll be on the internet and you can talk to them there. And that's a big frustration for me. I'm sure that's more true for like younger generations. But well, a lot of people have told me I'm an old man, and they've been saying that since I was like 14. So I'm counting down the clock, and eventually I will be old, and nobody will notice the difference. But
wow.
I just, yeah, it's frustrating. I think that same person you were talking about that commented just said, I was more saying the younger generation is trying to make it as such. So trying to make the internet a place for
It,
community. Yeah, I think it's a struggle and it's very addictive. And there's pros and cons. You got to use it wisely. But I we should not be living on the internet. We shouldn't live just like isolated in our houses and never go outside. That's crazy.
if the internet or social media is your only sense of community and you don't have a healthy, authentic, in-person community, I would think you were getting a very impoverished sense of community if that's your only outlet. And that may be what's the dominant trend right now with younger people. And I don't know. I try to offer something different when I can.
Yeah. Yes. I'm glad you described that as impoverished because that goes along with the expanded philosophy I have around self-determination theory, where I've expanded on it and I call it intrinsic abundance. That one of the first, I don't know, revelations, I guess you could call it, or realizations that I had was, well, for one, I was getting really frustrated in a lot of the work I was doing in youth mentorship, economic empowerment, counseling, and housing, homeless issues, nonprofit work, a lot of community facing stuff. I was getting really annoyed with how materialistic it was. And this is really ironic because a lot of people around me in those environments would consider themselves, I guess, anti capitalist. They don't always define that very well, but they tend to, it seems like they tend to hate consumerism or banks or I don't know, whatever's associated with that. But they're way more materialistic than I was. And I was getting so sick of it because it's like, how many times can you give somebody free stuff when you're not doing anything to solve their actual problems and you're not building any relationships? And so when you say that, a low quality form of relationships is a form of poverty or an impoverished form of community, it's like junk food. And one of the realizations I had with self determination is that while other people want to define wealth and poverty by materialism, I see this as frankly arbitrary. It's just kind of randomized. And if we want a definition that has a more consistent foundation, I think we should define wealth based on self determination, autonomy, competence, interconnection. And if that's the case, then my definition of true poverty would be dependence, ignorance, and isolation. And I think we're definitely struggling with those things in the world right now.
Well, that's my definition of wealth, and we've always I mean, we've talked about it before. I've never been materialistic. I grew up poor, and I've never like money and stuff has never meant anything to me. It's always been an inner wealth. It's my rich inner life. It's the people that I've formed connected with and have been important to me. That's where my sense of wealth has always come from.
Hmm. Yes.
And
Well,
maybe it's not for everybody, but I can only speak for me. It's
yeah. I
worked for me.
think
It's been a great value in my life.
yeah, it's more direct, it's more tangible, it's easier to measure. Um, I mean, if you think like currency is just a representation of resources, it's partially a fictitious thing. It's like these little pieces of paper, or to some degree we're just using monopoly money. And if you can get more direct to the things that meet human needs, then I think you're closer to wealth. And relationships are extremely important. I mean, this is the thing of how I know it makes more sense to me to define wealth by self determination is that if you define it by materialism, it seems kind of randomized from person to person in different contexts what that actually means. But if you define wealth by self determination, then it usually has a really positive impact on their materials, on their resources. So if you have even like if you're trying to survive in history and you have a couple of close people in your family or your tribe and you all have some basic skills to build some shelter and find some food and make it through these really harsh circumstances, then you're already way wealthier. I mean, that's in ancient times, whatever how you want to define ancient times, or at least most of human history. That was the difference between survival and death is your relationships, your skill, and your independence or autonomy. But I don't know. I meet a lot of people that really don't have any idea of how valuable those things are.
And maybe it isn't to them. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed if I get isolated for more than like a day or two just in my house too much, that I'm not as connected to that energy. And I know I'm reading Jordan Peterson's new book, which I'm sure gives me a great reputation among SJWs that tells them that I'm such an open-minded guy. I don't know. They tend not to like Jordan Peterson, but I'm reading his newest book, the sequel to 12 Rules for Life. And in the early part of the book, he's describing the psychology of socializing. That when you have conversations and you routinely socialize, you're getting this like routine form of exercise that helps you organize your inner self. And writing does a similar thing, and to some extent, playing music if it's lyrical. And so, what me and you are doing right now, as an example, is beneficial to both of us. And I mean, let's say if me and you were both really isolated for like 3 days, and then we did something like this, it could help pull us out of that funk and help us organize the chaos internally. So it's like it becomes refined into something that makes sense and to art or whatever it might be. And I'm thinking most people I've met who are really isolated, they get stuck. It becomes like a trap where they don't want to interact after a while. You can't convince them to value that because it's almost like going through a hangover after being drunk.
Yeah. I don't know. I always struggle with the psychology of people that are very different from me. So I'll probably never understand it other than from the outside.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. I don't know. I think what I'm still trying to crack the code for is um, how to expose people to experiences that are empowering or liberating in a real deeper sense that's more personalized, where they actually it's like what's the right recipe for that chemical reaction where they actually feel it internally.
It's that third space, and it's getting the right people, like the more self-actualized people in that third space. I've watched it happen over and over in different communities that I've been a part of. I've watched it happen in the last year on CTA. I've watched it happen somewhat with Counterweight. I've watched it happen in other Zoom communities that I'm a part of. So I see the magic happen. I see the growth. I see it just takes the right combination of people forming a healthy, authentic community that kind of provides the soil for what you're describing to grow. And I've seen it enough times to know that it's possible, and it's not even really that challenging or difficult to make happen. It just takes participation from the right people. And I think we're seeing that. Hopefully, this podcast and the community around it will be another portal that people can use to enter this larger community that I see forming.
Yeah. Something, yes. You're getting the gears turning in my head because I try to empathize with people that are struggling with apathy, I think is the umbrella I would use to tie a bunch of these threads together. In fact, I've come up with a phrase. I basically think it's an epidemic of mass chronic apathy, is what I call it. And I don't know, the more I write, I'm doing a lot of free writing to prepare for some of my research. In some of our recent episodes, I talked a little bit about some of the corruption in nonprofits and some of my work on self determination theory. So I'm doing a lot of writing on that and expanding my research. And social justice is an aspect of these problems. And I'm starting to zoom out a lot in the bigger picture. And I'm getting this weird sense of making these little connections that it seems like social justice is the most recognizable part of a much deeper problem. It's like an existential crisis. And through one lens, we could see this as a mental health crisis, which is very disorienting and hard to recognize because we also live in times where psychology and mental health is more understood and accessible to the average person than most of history. But it seems like we also have a mental health crisis. So it's like all these contradicting things happening at the same time and very quickly. And it really seems like most of what is obvious that we call social justice um, is really the surface level. And in the deeper sense of what's driving a lot of this stuff for a lot of people is uh, that those true forms of poverty, dependence, ignorance, isolation, and I mean, if you have, okay, something that I've started to notice recently is when you have a loss of communities, especially in major cities, you end up with an illusion of community or multiple of them, when in reality, it's just more people who are aimless, and it's like we're just a hive mind of strangers. So we're not really connected to each other at all, and we're just kind of living in each other's chaos. And it's I don't know, it's really hard to like articulate and define some of these problems, but I really hope that people can begin to look deeper on a more humanizing level and recognize some of the surface level stuff is just a distraction.
How do they do that if they're not already doing it? Like, I don't know how you teach that. But this is why I really want to talk to more social justice people. I really, if they'd stop running away screaming from me, I would love to sit down with them and see it from their perspective. I'm sure most of them are big hearted, well intentioned people that want to do just as much good in the world as I want to do. So I would love to sit down and get their perspective and try to understand some of these questions I have about why this is so appealing to them.
Yeah. Well, have I ever talked with you about the like activism and civil rights eras kind of being romanticized?
By the current generation?
Um, if you mean, say, millennials, kind of the younger adult generation, roughly, and maybe Gen Z. But yeah, so for a lot of people who are millennials and younger, uh, I think historical time periods of activism and civil rights and the gay revolution, gay liberation movement, whatever it was called in the 70s, all that stuff uh, is romanticized, especially in school. So I've talked about childhood sheltering. When I was growing up, my whole childhood was very controlled. I would have wanted to leave home literally as early as I could have remembered if I didn't think the rest of the world was just as bad and authoritarian. I didn't realize how extreme my situation was. And it is disorienting because a lot of people my age also experience this. I just had it a little more extreme than, say, the average person. But being sheltered, it's almost like you're in a fish tank and your fish parents, this is a weird metaphor, whatever, are telling you about all the things in the world, but you never get to experience the ocean. So you have to imagine what that's like. And then you go to school. I'm going to stop the fish metaphor. But I go to school, and that's basically 80% of my world. And I hear about Rosa Parks and MLK and all these other figures and all these movements, and that sounds really exciting to be an activist. And it's more broad. It's not concentrated and exaggerated to the level of social justice we see today. So say 15, 20 years ago, we're just admiring those people, and we're also it's hammered into us that these people did amazing things. And protesting and being angry and yelling about things and refusing to comply and being rebellious are all these really good things to do, which also gets romanticized even further because a lot of us in childhood were subjugated to authoritarianism from the same adults who were telling us about this amazing, free, rebellious world. It's like they're pulling strings in so many directions. It's no wonder to me that there's a lot of people roughly my age where they literally just want to travel the world and be activists and they want to save the world, and it just gets down this crazy rabbit hole and turns into a caricature.
Well, I'm not a stranger to rebellion, and it's a value that I hold. And I just wonder why their rebellion seems so authoritarian to me. It's very different from my own sense of rebellion. It seems more organized. It seems like they use it to bully and harass everybody that doesn't fall in line like they think everyone should. And it doesn't seem like rebellion to me. Like they're doing it for rebellion. It seems like something else.
Well, it's a different point of evolution in, say, the life cycle of social justice. A lot of what I was describing, I'm trying to understand what plants the seed of that develops and eventually becomes the kind of crazy ideology we see today. And I think romanticizing activism is one of the early experiences, and that if you get stuck on that too long, then your view of the world becomes a caricature. Like one of our commenters said, the phrase "superhero ego mentality." They want such problems to exist in order to become that hero. That's the Grey Defender commenting. Yeah, so
Yeah,
it starts less extreme and then eventually it drives them crazy to like the point we are today.
but that all happens in the when you romanticize anything, you're doing it with the imagination, and all this is happening. It's their little psycho fantasy they're living out in their head. It's not happening in reality. Like, I don't think reality is like they think it is in their head, which is another one of my criticisms of social justice. It doesn't seem reality based, it seems narrative based,
Hmm.
like a fantasy narrative that they get to participate in.
Yeah.
Like it seems more like there's more psychological reasons for it than real world data driven reasons to
Yep.
adopt social justice. It feeds a psychological need for the people who adopt it more than it addresses real world problems.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen that consistently with a lot of the activist movements that have been popular sometime throughout the last, say, 100 years. I see it in a lot of environmentalists, which is not a topic or theme that's referenced as often in social justice, but has definitely been taken over by social justice in recent years. Nonetheless, I mean, I'm kind of curious about your experiences in a particular way. You know, you've been a peer counselor and you've been working in contexts where mental health and counseling of some type are relevant. I mean, looking past the social justice specifically for a moment, do you encounter any like personality traits or say dysfunctions that may be more common, like romanticizing activism? Maybe that's not specifically tied to social justice, but like any of those things you see that might be a bigger issue underlying this. You know what I mean?
You mean from social justice oriented people?
I'm trying to look for the root archetypes, like things that drive this, like say outrage,
I,
addiction to outrage, or whatever it might be.
a lot of the people I work with, I don't think I work with a lot of the social justice crowd because I usually identify pretty early that we're not going to be a good match to work together. So I work more for people that are looking for individual empowerment. And I see a lot of social trauma, people that have been victims of legitimate social trauma. They've been
Mm,
ostracized, misunderstood, rejected for no good reasons, fired from jobs. They can't get a foothold in society. I've been that person, like the outcasts, the misfits. I've been that person, and I'm good with working with that population, at risk youth, those types of people. And these are people dealing with actual real problems. They don't have a need to be a hero in their own narrative. They're actually dealing with real problems and trying to be heroically master the problems in their lives. And I try to help them with that. So the themes I see are less narrative driven and more practical, like directed toward practical solutions to real problems. And a lot of it
mhm.
involves self empowerment and using their personal history to illuminate their the particular ways they've self empowered in the past and kind of build on those and draw on those so they can face present and future situations.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Well, at least I really connect with it, and I can think of my own examples because that's pretty much tied to the themes I discover in my work as a youth mentor. So even when you mentioned at-risk youth, um, I was in that category years ago, and it's weird how this stuff comes full circle. And I think one of the reasons everyone in my old cult network went totally silent the moment I went public with that video and I emailed a letter to like 300 people in the network. I think that was like nearly unprecedented in that network. I don't think anyone would ever have or at least before me, had never done something like that. But why would they come to a screeching halt from building in this drama, getting more and more hyped up, where I would just hear about people talking about me and gossiping and slander, and now they're trying to do this, and now this manager's saying that, and people I've never met in person, and just crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden I go public after I'm fired, and radio silence. And I think one of the reasons is because most people in that network knew that about, what is it, 2021? Uh, 9 years ago, I moved into transitional housing when I was 17. And I was in one of the programs in that network. And I had a really amazing time there. It was like transformational. It was the most radical transformation of my life. I went from hardcore sheltering, terrible health, extremely physically weak, chronic fatigue since I was 13. So when I moved into the program, I had had chronic fatigue for 4 years already. I continued to have it until it was about 13 years I had it total. But when I got to that program and I was fighting to save my health, and as a minor, without parental consent, and get a job, and I was broke, and it was just like all this stuff. It was like everything could have been totally against me, and I literally was having living a dream because I had my autonomy, and it felt like a miracle. And I went from that to a bunch of other stuff over the years, and then I was getting more tied into youth work, and I got back into it more deeply, and then I got into the secret club of this network. And I think the people that were tied to me that way were uncomfortable with the fact that I'd been on both sides of the fence, because we're supposed to be standing for youth empowerment and autonomy, economic empowerment. And I didn't even have to do anything for their awful abuses and dysfunction to look like the ugliest thing, because everything I stood for is what youth empowerment should be. And so, like, when you talk about people dealing with real world problems, practical things that are really disenfranchised, that are ostracized for no reason, those are serious issues. And social justice is part of the problem. And they're too embarrassed or ashamed to admit that. They've dug a hole too deep for some of these ideologues. They don't want to admit what they've done.
Every time you talk, I want more and more to have one on the show.
Yeah, that
Please,
was a
if you're out
rant.
there, we'll be nice to you. We'll be as nice as we possibly can. I
Completely
also want to
accepting.
reiterate that this is kind of a free for all session today. So if anybody watching wants to participate or come on and chat with us or interact in the comments, please do. We're also, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, I should have. We have a breakout room on the back porch that we're live streaming this from, and we're going to continue to do that each week. So if you want to watch this online on Zoom with other people that are watching the podcast and form community around that, there's an opportunity to do that as well. You can email me for the link, jeffandnemo@gmail.com.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I went in a bit of a rant there. I was just, when I process this stuff, I'm disgusted. And just by the evil of it, but at the same time, I do try to practice radical acceptance. I've never, like, for anybody, if we could get a social justice proponent on the show of any kind, or somebody that kind of dabbles in it, or is sympathetic, or whatever, to whatever degree they're into social justice, um, I think generally a lot of social justice supporters are going to be scared away from the show so far. I've noticed that people in social justice environments are really intimidated by my bluntness. And I don't really go on rants, and I'm not as totally forward and extroverted as I am here. Because a lot of the time, I don't want to talk about these topics with somebody that's just going to go on a rant about how all white people or all men or whoever is evil. But even so, being more reserved, people are they're intimidated by me being blunt, I guess. I don't know. You said you seem to have had similar experiences where people get uncomfortable and provoked, regardless of you trying your best to, like, be a friend.
Yeah. I mean, that's been my whole life. I'm just surprised it's happening around social. Like that's the latest thing it's happening around because it. But I'm always, I'm blunt without realizing I'm blunt. I don't. I think I'm just stating things that are just so obvious, and people are horrified to hear it stated. But I'm not intending to be blunt. I think I'm talking about the elephant in the room that everybody can see. So I put off people with some of my frankness too. I do want to make, you mentioned social justice and evil, and I do want to make the point that for the most part, I don't consider most social justice people evil, at least not the ones I know. I don't think they're evil people. I don't think they're actively engaging in anything evil. I think it can have harmful effects on people. I think being canceled sucks, especially when it's from somebody close to you. I think it's hurtful. I think it's harmful, but I don't want to impute evil to most of the social justice people and any of the ones that I know personally. I think I am cynical about the funding behind it and some of the corporations and people involved in pushing the ideology. And I think they could perhaps have evil motives. But on an individual level, I don't view it from a good and evil lens. But I do kind of fight and speak out against the harmful effects that I see it having.
Yeah, it's important to make distinctions. I think it's really disorienting for most people to imagine the layers to each human being. And that's something that I'm becoming more sensitive to that. Like just being able to imagine that a person can simultaneously be arrogant and compassionate. They can have both of those traits, maybe at the same time or different times. They could be shy but creative. There's all these traits that they can have in combination, and that makes a complex human being. And I think I do best managing those complexities and being able to make sense of them so I can still make effective criticisms and then also effective compliments and analysis in general. And I do better if I can separate a theme or an archetype or a belief system from individuals. So with whatever individual I'm interacting with, I tend to be really connected to that person specifically
Mhm.
and not, and if they're a social justice proponent or they kind of got one foot in, one foot out, uh, I'll still listen for their unique way of relating to it
Mhm.
and not like draw conclusions. Oh, they're probably going to believe this, even if a lot of it's kind of predictable. That they kind of generally believe the same things. I don't focus on that. I'm really trying to just like listen to what that unique person's experience is in that conversation. But uh, I've witnessed some very extreme things when it comes to this ideology. And so I will say that it's gone to some territories that are remarkably evil and dark. And I don't want to just throw that around loosely either. I mean, I don't think I ever call something cultish, with only the exception of the extreme cases where I'm like, people are behaving like this is a cult.
Okay.
There's unspoken rules, and everybody's walking on eggshells and afraid, and they have to show allegiance, and they have to use a certain inside language to communicate things that can't be said directly. And but I mean, it's a sensitive issue to get around the complexities.
I was using that word this morning with my roommate three or four times of what a cult it seemed like and the parallels between this and what I know about cults.
Yeah, it's
And if not
tough.
a cult, at least a religion. Because the other thing, like the experience I've been going through with these friends that have been kind of pushing back, the only other thing I can relate to is the experience I went through with Christians. Like it's the same. It's the same feeling I get when I'm, and not all Christians, but the really aggressive ones that are out to save you or that feel uncomfortable associating with you because of their religious beliefs. Or they'll
Yeah,
associate with you, but from a kind of love the center position where they're condescending to be friends with you. They don't approve of you, but they'll be friends with you out of Christian charity or whatever, but there's always, they're up here and you're a little like a rung or two below them.
Yep, yeah, I've definitely experienced that. Uh, that comes back to this kind of intolerance for variety, where I think we talked about this last episode. I don't remember exactly when I talked about this, but morality is often a container where people want to develop their morality so that it's sort of a bottom line, that it should be simple enough and accessible enough that every person can be moral. It shouldn't be some complex set a long list of things you have to do a certain way. If we're going to have a community that's effective, we need to have a moral container that's like the foundation of our community. But I think that gets carried away when people get ideological and they want the whole world to be under the same moral container. And I think that just drives people crazy because if you're out like beyond your little hub, your little community, and your little corner of the world, most things appear like chaos. And that's because the world is huge. There's tons of different species and ecosystems and history and meteors that could hit us at any moment. And it's like, why would anyone want to try to control that? I really think we're off base here when people get so obsessed with a fantasy of being this worldwide type of hero that where everybody has to be under the same belief system, the same religion. And I don't think the average person who's religious that way realizes how controlling that is. And it's just so normal to them. They don't really see it as controlling.
I've had religion used against me so much growing up that I don't. It feels the same way. It feels like social justice is used against me the same way that religion used to be used against me. And I'm very strengths based. I like to focus on the positive that somebody brings to a community or relationship. I like to focus on what's best about the person. What's the good stuff about this person? I don't like to focus on. I could pick out the negatives and magnify them and focus on that. And so if that's what people are doing to me, like looking past all of the good that I bring to a relationship and focusing on this one little objection of social justice and making that be like the whole thing about me, then that's not how I operate. And I told you this before, I hate being the problem child because I've been the problem child my whole life. I just have a complex about it. And I look for situations where I can be an asset and not a liability. And if people start to turn me into the problem child or start like finding little ways that I'm problematic, then that's just a sign for me to go find a different environment. And that's kind of what's been happening since I started this podcast is people are homing in on this is the defining feature of me, despite everything else they know about me and all the other experiences they've had with me, and making this be, it's not strengths based. And if you can't be strengths based with me, like I try so hard to be with everybody else, then maybe it is time to just go different ways.
Yeah.
I think we have a commenter in the comment section, the Gray Defender, who may join us.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to clarify that to make sure that's
well,
what
he'll
we
be our
meant.
first guest, or they will be our first guest if they join. So I hope you do,
Yeah.
Gray. Come on.
I'm connected to, I know who they are. That's somebody that I got connected to in person. Well, sort of, not like physically in person, but I know who they are. I could probably connect you guys on Discord and you can send them the link.
I put it in the comment section. But
Oh, really?
yeah.
I don't see it. If you mean like the live chat.
This link, our link that we're on. Unless YouTube.
It says you have a
Links it
comment
out.
on our live chat on YouTube that says, yeah, join us, come on in, and then there's no link.
Further down. Oh, he said he didn't see it either. So I'm posting it. Maybe YouTube mask it or something.
I think we should try and connect with. I'll connect you to Gray on Discord, maybe.
Okay. Or you could send him the link. You just pull it off of
Oh, that's true.
the Zoom. That's all I've been doing.
That's true.
Oh, okay.
We should have like a little song that plays when we have technical issues or something. I'm thinking like a flute
You're the music man.
and hula dancing, kind of a Hawaiian, like a ukulele or something.
Because I've been on YouTube chats before where they've posted a Zoom link that I've used to join. So I don't.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't really use Discord ever, and I got really into it since joining Counterweight. It's kind of funny how that worked. And that's like 95% of my social media use is that Discord, and I really enjoy, I guess, social media. If it's a personal thing where it's like we literally are a community that's just like talking and sharing things and
I really
that
like
we
Discord.
connected to like action.
Yeah.
But what did you
We're
say?
using the Discord server that I started. We're kind of using it as a hub to build to grow the community from. The Backport Zoom and the Discord. We're going to start using those to refer people. Like, just if you're looking for community around this, join the Discord server would be a good thing, and or come on the Backport Zoom, and we're going to start collecting people in those two places.
All right. I sent Gray the link,
Okay.
and I told them to rename themselves before going live. If they want to be more discreet or whatever. Because sometimes people will go live like instantaneously, and it might use their real name. And I
Zoom
know.
doesn't let you. I wish they let you do it right before you join, but
Hmm,
you have to go in your account and change it in your master
ah,
account.
we'll figure it out. I have a hunch that Gray is not as concerned about it.
There it is, the
Oh,
great.
nice.
Yay, our first guest.
Well, this is cool.
Yeah,
We're getting more advanced.
they are connecting as we
That's right, the Gray
speak.
Defender. When
Hello.
I think of, hello, you there?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Hi, thank you for joining. You're our first guest. Very excited.
I'm probably gonna have to mute the YouTube so I don't hear reflection. So
Yeah, I've had to do that
Yeah,
too.
that's wise. Otherwise, it gets disorienting. What name should I call you?
you can just call me Gray. It's fine.
Cool. Excellent. Gray it is. Is this a Gandalf reference?
Actually, it's a very vague, like Warhammer 40K reference.
Video game
I
stuff?
remember Warhammer.
Kinda. It's more of a tabletop. Like they like
Yep.
measure things out, but there has been video games, but it started out as like a tabletop experience where they have like different units and you paint them and it costs a lot of money and then you throw them against each other. Unfortunately, John, I do not have a camera on this computer.
We'll have
Um,
to just imagine, maybe do some fan art. We'll give you a top hat.
I mean, I could just put a picture of myself up on there. You can pretend that I'm here in spirit.
If you
I'm
really
happy
wanted
to
to.
just have a voice for now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we publish these episodes audio only on all major audio sites. Fun fact, in case anyone didn't know that, but if you want to listen to the podcast or send it to anyone after this live stream, we do publish the audio. But
Yeah.
yeah, great. It's good to have you on. You've been giving us some good comments throughout the episode. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very interesting discussion you guys are having, and I'm kind of just overdoing it with writing, so I figured I'd just join. But
Yes, that's awesome. Yeah, I got a
What's
little
on your
ranty
mind?
today. What'd you say, Jeff?
What's on your mind?
well,
Right?
I was interested in the I know Nemo's reaction to SGWs being evil, and I don't believe that a human. I mean, humans are capable of evil and good, but I feel like the basis of reasons of why they believe they should be evil and good is more on the understanding of what is fair and unfair. And it's that people have a certain sense of understanding what the world is based on their experience. And if those experiences jar with what they believe their ideals are, they're more likely to become very more unstable, more angry, and stuff like that. So, as when I look at SJWs, I dislike it, but it's more I feel they're misguided in understanding that battle of good and evil is that there's no room of forgiveness. It's like a more radical Christianity where your original sin is based on what you were born as, and the really only way to quote unquote atone is not just not be active participant, but actively fighting anytime they see something that might seem to be, off color or racist or sexist. They're supposed to actively attack those, which reminds me more of a very early level of like Christianity, where you had the Crusades and you had that urgency of attacking other people because that was a threat to your existence type of thing.
That sounds right to me, and there's no redemption other than what you say. It doesn't matter how good of a person you are. It doesn't matter your acts or your deeds.
Which is funny to me because you say that you have that problem with a lot of very big Christians, but I feel that Christians don't understand that it's not just forgiveness, but redemption and making towards steps to being better. Like they don't understand that, yes, you may have done bad in the past, but there is a path for people to be better and bettering themselves. And I feel the ones you interact with just go, well, you did this at one time and you're forever marked with that. Yeah, which is very un-Christ-like, unfortunately.
And with social justice or even Christianity, but just because they think I'm doing something bad doesn't necessarily mean I think I'm doing something bad. So
or
they don't get to define what's bad, what a bad act is in my world.
Right. The problem SJWs focus so much on what people are saying that, like I said, the narrative is the story, and they think that anyone that believes in the story is going to act out in real life. So their idea is like, if they're saying bad things now, they're going to just be aggressive in real life and attack people and kill them because they don't like the skin color. And there's no disconnect between if they do that, they're going to get shot and killed. So there's restraint in the real world. There's entertaining thoughts and going through with them. And then there's different ways people deal with hatred. One type of hatred is that you don't want to interact with people, you'll avoid them, or you want to actively say you should be, get away from me. And then the violence portion is like the most extreme examples when you extremely dehumanize someone.
And I can't tell you how many times I've been told the harm that I'm doing from using certain words and the violence. That words are violence. Mm-hmm. You're harming people by the language you use, and that's so foreign to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm constantly asking for evidence of this harm, and they can't. Like, what harm am I doing? And they can never show the actual harm, but they assure me that I'm doing harm and I'm doing violence by the speech and language that I choose to express myself in.
I say I call them true believers. They don't try to understand the reasons behind why they do stuff. They just try to enforce something because it sounds good on paper. If you don't take in, the realities of humans, and that it's similar with how SJWs view it too, because the problem is they radicalize people by taking maybe a mild racist comment and turning it into this crusade where they need to end that person. They're seeking not to reform them, they just want to attack them to make them feel better about their own insecurities and such and stuff. And what
Yeah.
they're doing is making people more radical because they have made themselves a threat on average people's lives. They're attacking people who may not even said anything racist, but it sounds racist to them, and they're getting missed attacked as well, as if they were, Satan or Hitler themselves type of thing. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Gray
that's
is
what. Oh, good.
Gray, I'm wondering, I know a little bit about you because we've talked more personally
mhm.
off camera. And um, have you had any experiences throughout your life where you seen somebody become more social justice oriented over time and like what that evolution looks like? Or like certain people where you can see how they would turn into kind of go that route? Like any
um
examples?
I would say my brother is a bit more liberal than I am. He's more centrist, but like I understand the concept of someone becoming a social justice warrior because there is other problems of bullying and ostracizing that you guys talk about, and wanting to belong to a group that belongs to you, and social justice warriors also tend to collect a lot of these people that are ostracized. And I'm not going to say that bullying is good or bad in that manner, but that's kind of the litmus of how these people turn into social justice warriors later on in life. But the thing is, it's like, actually a good example of this is the jock and the nerd, the stereotypical jock and the stereotypical nerd. In high school, the jock bullies the nerd, and and stuff like that. But as life goes on, the nerd becomes the bosses of the jocks. And what does the nerd do in the position of power? He bullies the jocks back
Hmm.
because it's about revenge. And what SJWs don't realize is when they're more about revenge, they are becoming the very bullies that they hate.
Yes. In some of my research in youth-related topics, the kids who are most severely punished in childhood are more likely to desire revenge and
Mm-hmm.
use that as a tool in adulthood, and they're also more likely to reject responsibility and embrace victimhood. And I understand kind of why that happens, but it's a bit of a rant, and I don't need to go into that too much.
Mm-hmm.
But just as a tidbit there, I think you're onto something.
Yeah,
That's
I'm not a
pretty
believer
cool.
of hitting a child. I'm of the belief you need to psychologically put them in a position they're not going to be comfortable in, and then
Interesting.
explain. Yeah, like stuff like isolating the kid, removing all of their possessions, and having them sit in a room by themselves, and they have to sit there and reflect on their actions.
Hmm.
Does that
Oh,
That's an
women are
interesting
big.
concept.
Socially, women have always had the power of choosing who and who not they like in a public setting. And once they have that determination, then the crowd generally tends to follow that woman. Um, so
Can we
I've
Yeah,
switch
you
seen
talking
that.
about
topics?
I think he's react her comment I put in the chat. I said I've
Yeah,
been
I read it
bullied
immediately.
by women more than any other group. It wasn't the jocks that most of the bullying came from me
Mm-hmm.
growing up. It was women,
Oh
and it
yeah.
still
Isn't that
is.
funny?
And I
S-
think that gets overlooked a lot too.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah. There's
stereo.
many forms of bullies and bullying and stuff like that, and woman bullying others is something that society has not been able to talk about. And what I've noticed in like China, Japan, and I think China, I've looked at their media and how these manga artists kind of write their woman, and they usually write them they're powerful, but they're bitter, mean, envious, very manipulative. And there's even scenes, I think, in some anime where they're like, the girls actually like sexually harass the guy and like shame him and like strip him up on the tower and take pictures and then spread it around and just ruin the guy entirely.
Yeah.
That
And
sounds toxic.
it's very toxic. And the problem is it's not talked about because, again, Japanese are very about face. It's about
Mm.
appearing nice and appearing good rather than being actually good. which is funny because the Japanese have a word for it, but the Americans are becoming also like that, but not really realizing that they're wearing masks and think they're being better than they are by cleansing their ego, I call it.
Hmm.
They have no personality because they've cleansed their ego, and they're not allowing the self to find out what they like and dislike, not their principles, and actually reflecting on that.
It's an interesting reference. I mean, I don't know a lot. I feel like I don't know enough about outside cultures from the ones I've experienced
Mm-hmm.
to analyze too much. But when you talk about like the manga phenomenon, that type of female character, I do see a lot of that in American live action movies.
Mm-hmm.
Strong woman character, but it's like in a way that's a caricature. And like if I'm just talking with me and some of my guy friends, and presumably the majority in the room is attracted to women, so the topic is relevant and we're
Yeah.
talking about what we find attractive in women, that strong female character. I'm Superwoman. I'm basically ready to go into a bodybuilding competition. I'm going to kick your ass, and I'm bitter and angry too. It's like that character is not attractive. I mean, it's sometimes a character that has multiple qualities, androgynous, like a woman like that can be attractive, but most of the time, I'm pretty sure they're trying to appeal to more of a woke audience and almost like more of the pop culture simpleton version of a woke audience, not even like the
Mm-hmm.
highbrow academics, but like the movie goers that are just going to say, "Ooh, strong woman, yay," and just like wave a flag.
Well, yeah, which is funny because I watched. I don't know if you guys watch this channel. It's Think Before You Sleep.
Mm-mm.
Hmm.
It's a really good channel. He psychoanalyzes and talks about certain different society stuff, mostly from a male point of view, and he talks about how he doesn't like the Captain Marvel movie, but more so that Wonder Woman herself, that that movie that everyone liked, and he breaks down how Wonder Woman wasn't even the hero of her own film. That the the boyfriend of Wonder Woman was actually the hero of the film and actually went through like the hero's journey, and then Wonder Woman was actually detriment and almost ruined their plans multiple times because she's not thinking like a mortal. She's immortal. So there was different mentalities when she went into it. And it was very
Right.
good because it shows like it's a Hollywood movie. It's trying to promote that woman good, but as masculine. But if you don't understand what the difference between positive masculinity and negative masculinity, you're just going to put traits together and think, oh yeah, this woman is can do and everything else, but you're only getting a very limited view of what makes a good superhero movie, what makes a good male, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, if I want to really provoke social justice proponents, I'll say something like the majority of toxic masculinity I've experienced comes from women in my life, and they don't know what to do with that because I'm using their
Yeah,
terminology and in a way that they're like, no, that's not what you're meant, that's not what you're supposed to do at all. You're
right.
supposed to use it to
It's kind of
criticize men
funny too.
only.
Well, that's the thing. There's a lot of woman influence on what they call toxic masculinity, because what are most men trying to do but impress the woman around them? And
Most men, you think? Or
I
they
think
think?
I think a lot of men trying to impress the woman around them, and they look for what traits are
Oh,
succeeding.
impress. I thought you
Yeah,
said
impress.
oppress.
Sorry,
Okay.
no, and sorry,
Impress.
impress. But like, there's a lot of like, oh, I do a lot of guys try to act like bad boys because from the surface level, that's what they think they need to do in order to get a woman. And there have been, again, women have also been saying, well, I don't want a nice guy. I want a jerk, a bully that's willing to beat me up, and it's crazy because it's like that's the opposite what you really should need. But that woman has such a, I think it's like a low self-esteem thing that I may not be. It may be ego thing too because they think they can handle the abuse or something like that. But either way,
Yeah.
that's what these guys are looking at and being like, well, I can do that, or they think that catering to a woman's every whim is the only way for you to get their attention.
I think
Because
what you're talking about is context sensitive. I understand what you're trying to say, but I think there's a lot of implications that get communicated because a lot of women are into feminism. And so, to some degree,
right,
in a really weird way, it can communicate to men, maybe even unintentionally at times, that they want a certain type of guy. And a lot of the signals are contradictory. A
oh
nice
yeah,
guy who's a male feminist, but also actually a dominating man.
hmm,
But most of the time, in my experiences, a lot of women are not focused on dating most of the time. Men seem to be more focused on the pursuit, but a lot of my experiences with women, if it does come down to like a gendered thing, feminism is really prominent for them. That's like a lens for them.
yeah. I'm
So
not saying
more,
I'm not saying women are. What I mean is that yes, men are the bigger pursuers. What I'm saying is an incorrect assumption. I'm saying that's what it appears as
yeah,
that gets
sure.
through because again, the contradictory of feminists going at. I mean, there is article of a feminist crying and complaining because the only masculine men she finds are Trump supporters. So she's kind of having that. So
Mm,
I mean, there's male traits that are attractive to women, but the problem is that everything is so confused and kind of amplified that both genders have a misconception of what the other gender should be doing. And I think that because of that big misunderstanding and lack of understanding between, the dynamics, what a woman goes through for the day versus what a man goes through for the day, when we kind of take for granted, one guy, well, a guy would be like, yeah, she gets all the free sex she wants, but in the woman's point of view, it's like it's not the hottest men that she gets. It's a mixture of this type of guy and this type of guy, and the guy's not thinking of different types of guys. He's just thinking, oh, she gets all the hot guys. But then he's not realizing that no, if he was in that position, he'd be getting very different types of woman.
The war between the sexes, or the misunderstanding, our inability to bridge the gap between the sexes, seems to be thousands and thousands of years old by now. I'm glad you brought up, you talked about positive masculine traits and negative
mm,
masculine traits. I'm glad that someone out there thinks that there are positive masculine traits and that you brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
Because I
yeah,
think that's another thing that gets lost. Like, there's nothing good about men at all, ever,
yeah. I'm
any
still
kind.
here. My camera died. I'm putting a new battery in, but
Uh,
yeah, I think something that you were coming to, Gray, was that and you didn't say this, but I'm going to add it on to kind of what you were describing,
mm-hmm.
that when men are so disparaged and being a man is seen as a pathological thing, then anyone who is attracted to men is their sexuality is going to be pathologized or disparaged inevitably. And there's more straight people than gay people statistically. So there's a large population of women out there who are attracted to men, generally, because it's a very common thing.
Right,
That now their sexuality is being pathologized in some way
right.
because
Because
men
feminism
are.
doesn't always it's like you demon. It's funny because feminism's like we must demonize masculinity in men and encourage femininity in men, while we must demonize femininity in men and promote masculinity in women.
Yeah, it's crisscross all over the place. Man, is it
Right.
really confusing to try to navigate socially as a man these days. I found that people tend of like both genders. I don't even know how to articulate this fully, but tend to like enjoy my masculinity. It seems like that there's certain traits that they want that are missing from an environment because the environment is being so pushed towards this kind of anti-male feminine caricature.
Mm.
and but they'll to my face, or if you ask them their opinions, they're not going to go and say, "Yeah, I want these masculine traits," because they're supposed to disparage
Right,
masculinity.
because only thing they're thinking of is that there's negative masculinity, and the opposite of toxic masculinity in their eyes is not positive masculinity. It's actually femininity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they're really, really enforcing that these feminine traits are attractive to women, and it really isn't, because usually a lot ends up happening to a lot of these feminine men is that they get abused by the more masculine dominant woman. It's not a relationship where, I mean, there is relationships of feminine men and masculine women, but it more ends up happening being that you have a cuckold situation, or she gets to have the rights to kind of abuse the male, and the male kind of just accepts it. And that level of abuse is not good for either gender, because she's not really learning that her actions are actually hurting the guy, and the guy's just taking it because that's all he believes he can get, because he's so discouraged. And even like, my thing is, there's such a high number of male to female transgenders as well, and I feel that is because the shaming of the sex has become so bad. It's become on a psychological level that it's better to be female.
I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if that is a thing happening somewhere, because
Oh
social
yeah, I'm
justice
not saying
is a
all trans.
process.
I'm just saying that I think a large influence is that attack of, it's more, if your hatred of being male is stronger than you think that you are female, I don't think that surgery will help you in the long run, because it's not, you're looking at the wrong frame of mind. You have to look inner on yourself and say, what is my reflection? Not, I want the world to see my reflection as thus. And I think
Yeah.
that's like the internal understanding of that versus the external shaming of that is very, very drastic. That's
This
Yeah.
is why I wish there were more men's groups. I've been pushing for one for a while through my
We should do
community. I
it.
would love to get a positive men's group going,
Yes.
positive masculinity.
Oh, there is red pill communities and stuff like that. Just MGTOW groups, and the big people on YouTube tend to have talks with each other and stuff like that. I think it's good that men are starting to talk about these issues, because the thing is, every guy believes they're on an island and they're by themselves.
Really?
And oh
Mm.
yeah, big time. And the problem is they get so stuck in that they're like, oh, it can't happen to me, but they need some direction different from how society is telling them how to behave.
Mhm.
Because
And
in
I
the
think it
end,
should come from other men. I don't think people who are
right,
not men should be providing that
right.
direction.
It's like when a feminist says, well, you don't know how to be a woman. And then it's like, okay, I won't tell you how to be a woman, but you can't tell me how to be a man because you're not a man. And you don't understand the dynamics. There's different dynamics than being masculine than being feminine.
Yeah.
So my thing is that there's a lot of lost guys. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to react. They're frustrated. They're angry. They're desperate. I know this past year has been, well, it's called the year of the simp,
Huh.
because the thing is, this, the weaker willed men have actually, they're not going dating anymore. They are so demoralized that the only thing they feel like they can do is to pay on Twitch and follow these girls and pretend to have relationships with them. That's how lonely they are. They're not even, it's not even
Do they know they're
sexualized.
consciously doing this? Like they
They're
know it's not a
consciously
real.
doing this because I don't think they're unaware of it. They're so discouraged that they will ever find anyone that will like them or love them who they are in real life, that they are literally buying the parasocial relationship to pretend to be in relationships with these girls on Twitch or personalities.
Yeah, it's a ugly situation, and I gotta say I'm kind of removed from some of those pockets of those issues, because I almost never pursue relationships. It's not at all my main concern. I think there's also a lot of guys, like if there are, for the men who are, like say highly creative and have like a high level of energy and very self-driven and are more confident or have a solid foundation, those of us who are like that, we'll kind of encounter maybe dating opportunities and dabble in things accidentally and see, oh, that's what's out there. And it's like we walk in the room with the party. The party is the speed dating in this metaphor.
Yeah.
Open the door and see it's like a shit show and it's a
Mm-hmm.
disaster. And then we're
Mm-hmm.
like, I do not want to be in this. Close
Mm-hmm.
the door,
Yep.
meet ourselves somewhere else, and then just go freaking make some music or paint something. And
Yeah.
so I
And
guess you might say that makes me a MGTOW, which stands for men going their own way, for anyone who doesn't know. But I don't even think about it. I
no,
actually, I am not in like niche worlds in the manosphere.
I mean, like I
But
said, it's a specific place. My thing of understanding is that as MGTOW is more of a philosophy than anything, than like an organization or anything like that, it kind of stands on reason that men are naturally coming to these conclusions without ever hearing such a concept. Because at the end of the day, MGTOW, and I talk to people, MGTOW is not a solution, it's a survival tactic.
Hmm.
It does not solve your problems. It only seeks to make sure that you protect yourself and that you indirectly starve the system because you're not interacting. You're seeing the game for what it is because you open the door and you find this craziness and you isolating yourself. Every good man that isolates themselves gives room for another simp or angry male or just really thirsty guy to take the place in the dating market. And I've noticed that women have seen that increase of these guys that are very unhinged, very desperate, and very, sad.
What do
And
you
rough
think
situation for us.
a potential solution is?
I think the first thing has to be we have to lay down ground rules for
I hate
how
ground.
we interact with each other as genders. What we want from another gender, work on. I know there's exceptions to the rule, but when we had more defined gender roles, things work out better because we get, okay, we can trade this for this. This is the equivalent exchange. But what ended up happening is because feminism didn't want to be within those constraints anymore, they freed themselves from their gender role, but they did not free the men from their gender role. And so from the 70s, 80s, 90s, you'll have men that think they're complying and doing the right thing and getting married and all that stuff. And 70% of the divorces are coming from the woman. And a lot of these guys don't even know what's hit them or what they should have really looked for in a partner before getting married because they were going with what society had told them. And I think what needs to happen is that we need to update the dynamic and rule set for what men and women are looking for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this ties into earlier in this episode, I suggested that we may have a mental health crisis on our hands, like an
Mm-hmm.
epidemic. And actually, if we're really tying things all together, my favorite men's advocate, kind of gender-focused philosopher, psychologist kind of a person in the public sphere is Dr. Warren Farrell.
Mm-hmm.
And he is really hated by feminists, even though in the 70s he was the only male feminist elected to the board of now. I don't think he's really a feminist anymore. He's been really focused on men's issues for quite a few decades now. And
Mm-hmm.
he really says, like, he wrote a whole book called The Boys Crisis. So I think that there's such a severe lack of mentorship.
Right.
Me and a bunch of my friends, we've all said at different times and like had realizations that not only did childhood feel very aimless and chaotic for us, and for me, very sheltered, but that there was a real lack of mentorship, and that was incredibly rare. And I really think that uh, a good, positive adult male role model is different from a positive adult female role model, and they offer different things, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a variety between the two. And when one is deeply missing in the world, then things get really skewed and out of hand.
Right.
And
One of the biggest problems is, like you said, you were aimless because you had no father figure in
Mhm.
your life kind of giving you any guidance and everything else. And the biggest problem is because masculinity is so demonized that it has been basically neutered from mainstream. Most of the masculine guys that you see are feminized or large feminists that tell the incorrect understanding of how to even discuss things with women or talk with them or how you go about it. Now, I'm a person that's very blunt. So my belief is that if you're blunt and straightforward, people who are deceptive towards you will not last. And people who understand where you're coming from will naturally seek to converse with you. And I've studied, I indirectly study. I study kind of people as a hobby and watching their actions, reactions. That's cool. Whatever you believe, Alex. And I've started developing my own theories and how the genders view each other in that interaction. And I've been, talking with various people. We got to test the theories, talk about it. It is not for every single person, but I feel like if we have general guidelines of understanding the reality that each gender is in, that we can be more compassionate, and understanding towards them.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've had the good fortune where most of my close friendships over the years, uh, despite the gender war, and I've been so closely tied to it. Extreme feminism and hatred of men was a staple of my life growing up. I had no idea there was anyone else that acknowledged they'd experienced negative or even abusive situations via feminism or being hated as a boy or a man until I was 17 and I found The Myth of Male Power by Dr. Warren Farrell. So I was definitely one of those guys that felt really isolated, at least in childhood. But a lot of my close friends, the gender balance has been pretty mixed. And if I think of some of the female friends I've had that I've really admired and were very close, uh, I empathize so much with some of their issues, and I see how they connect to my issues as a man, and how we're all in the same boat, and we're just on different sides of those issues and experience a different corner of it. But when people are honest across genders and you have those close in interactions, it reveals a lot that allows you to empathize. Uh, like I've had female friends who've had actual sexual assault happen against them where other people, including say doctors, didn't believe them because false accusations are such a problem now. And
Mm-hmm.
that I've never been angrier at false accusations until I heard my female friends share those stories.
Right.
It's like people forget we're all in the same boat here.
Right. And it's been my gripe with like the Me Too movement is that the people that need to take this seriously are the professionals and your family giving you support, because the only way you can kind of work on fixing and resolving these cases is if you have to have some, not a shadow of a doubt, but a shadow of belief that this possibly could have happened, and do your best to rectify and go through it and investigate to the full ability. And like I said, not people on the street are not obligated to believe you, but doctors and police officers and paramedics should be taking their job seriously and getting to the bottom or providing evidence as they can and talk about it. And that's who we need to focus on, because once also the justice system in courts as well, that's who we need to focus on. Those four aspects of those people you need to turn the help to, because if you can't get those four to at least help you or try to help, then what ends up happening, like I said, the real victims of sexual violence get ignored because their false accusers are now creating this culture where it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, just believe no matter what. And I think it's rather than believe no matter what, trying to give that encouragement to go through and seeking professionals who have the legal right to resolve these problems, or at least investigate. And it needs to be
Yeah.
encouraged that women go to these authorities and these authorities take these seriously before the trail runs cold and it gets really hard to prove or not prove.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I find in the work that I've done as a youth mentor and in homeless housing issues, the people that are likely to make false accusations are often in a particular social class, and the people who are most likely to be sexually assaulted are in a different social class. And so it's almost a class issue too. And that disconnect makes it really confusing because, especially like for people who are supposed to take in information and reports of sexual assault and things like that, if they're getting 30% false accusations mixed in with the rest of it,
Mm.
it's really messy. There's multiple threads, different trends happening at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
and it makes it really an ugly situation, certainly.
Yep. Society does not work in a single flow. Everything is interconnected and moving against each other. And that's one thing people have difficulty understanding. That you don't have to do a single thing to one single track to bend society. You can bend uh, society stuff by going at different angles and understanding the ins and outs of the inputs and outputs. But when people get too linear in thinking, they miss those opportunities to deeper their understanding of what's going on. Like you said, there's two different trends. There are women that are honestly sexually assaulted that are not taken seriously by professionals, but then there's false accusers that go everywhere on social media and everything else except for those professionals. So even if they do go out in public with their thing, there's no avenue from that point for them to seek legal damages or to rectify and give justice.
Yep, and we're definitely seeing things getting worse. Something I'm pretty concerned about generally across the board is the breakdown of trust. And
Mm-hmm.
that it then becomes a situation that's so disempowered because nobody trusts each other. And what do you do in those cases? It's you can't even establish a foundation. But say I don't know, Gray, if you want to say anything, you and Jeff kind of take it away for a bit here because I think we already went over, and I only have like a couple minutes left before I have to go.
All
Yeah,
right.
and I'm looking in the comments section, and there's somebody in the comments section that has a very different point of view. And this
Well,
topic brought up a lot. I wonder if y'all would want to come back next week or maybe the week after, and we can continue the discussion and have more of an episode devoted to this topic too.
I do
Yeah,
hope Alex Ferranti does come through and explains, and I would like to hear his point of view. Maybe something I have wrong. I am open to having that, but I what I don't like is just writing off ideas because from the surface. I liked hearing how would you go about how would you go about your ideas? Because there may be very inventive ways that you don't think about when you think about certain concepts and stuff like that. And I feel as far as trust goes, I think that's something culturally we need to address in real life in how we treat people and trying to be understanding and listening. And when they're angry, not to take it personally on them, but to try to understand why they are angry. And I think that's the one thing with SJWs. They do have the basis of a legitimate argument. The problem I have is how they go about trying to resolve the argument and the effectiveness of how they're doing it. But I understand what makes an SJW and how they come from a bit because I have a few friends that I've seen turn to SJWs. Well, Alex is a very androgynous name, so I'm sorry I assumed that you were male.
yeah. Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, we're a relatively unknown podcast still, but we get all kinds of random people that kind of show up once in a while. But yeah, I appreciate your thoughts and the nuance, Gray, as you joined us. There are some moments in the show today that we touched on maybe more, I don't know, emotional and complex issues.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm going the Buddhist route, we could say that we're united by human suffering and misery, that everybody is vulnerable and we all have
Yep,
things we struggle with, and sometimes it comes out in ugly ways. And
definitely.
so, just for anybody that's getting to know our podcast for the future, Jeff and I are both really care about making this a place that's open for people to interact and socialize and connect. And we don't want it to be a place that where we're actively doing anything that would scare people away. If they're scared away, it's going to be because of what they're struggling with, or maybe it's just not the show for them. But my hope is that this place can continue to develop as a hub that's a refuge. And we're not trying to be walking on eggshells and sugarcoating. I think the three of us right now in this conversation are all blunt, but we're trying to make it an open environment that's like naturally, legitimately accepting of people. So we'll keep trying for the future.
Yeah, and I like what you said about trust. I definitely have trust issues with women based on my experiences with them. They seem to have trust issues with me. I have trust issues built accumulating with social justice warriors now. And so I think trust would be a good topic to visit again in the future. And we may even have time next week at the end of that podcast. We're going to have my friend Bev online, who's female, so we'll have that point of view if we want it.
Yeah. Yeah, we're keeping on planning to get a variety of people on the show. Most of my friends are a real hodgepodge mix. It's kind of what happens when you're ostracized and kind of a fringe person. Everything ends up being kind of all mixed up. Like last week, I think I referenced Rudolph, the claymation film with the Island of Misfit Toys. Sometimes that's the most awesome experience. Everybody that just kind of feels a little bit out of place, and you kind of find yourselves together, and you all feel out of place, so you have a new place. I don't know. It's a cultural experiment, but you can contact us at jeffandnemo@gmail.com. You can show up here on YouTube for the live stream every Saturday afternoon. It's 3 to 5 or 3:35 p.m. Central Time. It's different for different time zones. I don't know, Jeff. Is there anything else you want to reference before we
We
end
have
the
the
show?
Discord server that you can join. You can email us for the invite, and then we have the Backport Zoom, which we also do impromptu podcast on there. So there's opportunity to continue the discussion this later in the week. If you don't want to wait for next week, you could come to the back porch and we could do a podcast.
Yeah. Yep. I'm also pretty active on the Counterweight Discord. So you can go to counterweightsupport.com if you want to join there, especially if you need any help with the social justice issue that's negatively affecting you. But Gray, I'm glad you joined us. And if you want to be a guest for like a full episode sometime, we can connect for the future.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Hopefully, we get more people watching later on, and we can have a very interesting discussion. I'll talk to you another time about what I should focus on. So, also send me the link to the Discord if you could, the group, so I'll see
Yeah,
you there as well.
for
Okay.
sure.
Nemo can send it through Discord.
Mhm.
Does that work?
Yep. Yeah, well, I'll make sure we all get connected. And I don't know, I guess that's it, unless anybody has any last words.
No, this is a great show, Gray. I'm also glad that you stopped by and participated. This is exactly what we're looking for. So thank you. I liked what you had to say.
Yeah, it was awesome, man.
Yeah, I've been busy past few weeks helping family at home, holidays. So it was nice. I had the week Saturday free, and I saw the notification. I'm like, I gotta catch you guys.
Oh.
Yeah,
Well,
we're figuring it out. It's really great you showed up because we missed our guest for today, but we all roll with the punches. Everything's New World Chaos. But yeah, I
It's
gotta
not.
go myself. Got other
Yep.
things gotta do.
okay.
So
Well, we'll see everyone next week.
that's right.